All right, so I'd like to, thank you guys for coming. I know you guys are probably itching to get started with the break and everything, but I thought it'd be worthwhile to, go over the guidelines with you, and hopefully this will give you kind of a good framework through which you can approach the book report and approach the book itself, as we get into break and as we finish up this semester. So overall, basically, you'll see like the previous two reports, this one's going to be worth the 80 points and three full pages, double spaced. So that's the same. And then what's also the same, you'll be using and citing the text as you kind of build your paper and you build your arguments. So again, the format itself uh, roughly mirrors what we've been doing before. um, what I do here is kind of lay out the thesis of the book. So basically, the thesis talks about how the criminal justice system, as an institution, um, is ineffective. And it's ineffective in two different ways. The main thesis kind of looks at the class bias that's evident in the criminal justice system. So, being part of the kind of wealthy upper class, you're advantaged when it comes to the criminal justice system compared to if you're not part of the wealthy upper classes. And so, I said this in the lecture. You like to think that when somebody's encountering the criminal justice system, whether it be kind of at the beginning of the system, if you encounter a police officer, or when you're actually kind of going through the system, when you're going to court, or when you're getting perhaps a sentence, you'd hope that it's not based upon somebody's social characteristics, but rather based upon kind of what they did in reference to what the law says that people should be doing. So, in other words, you like to think that people will go through the system kind of based upon some type of objective merit of the action rather than somebody's race, somebody's age, somebody's class, so on and so on. So here the argument is, it's not all equal. Not everybody starts on the same footing, but rather, if you're from a upper class, you have advantages when it comes to the criminal justice system, advantages that are not shared by non upper class members. So that's kind of the first focus of the book. And what I call kind of the subthesis is that not only is the criminal justice system biased, as an institution towards kind of the wealthier individuals, it's also ineffective as a whole. So, I said this in the lecture too. Um, Sometimes in a capitalist system, people are okay with how money equals power. If in a capitalist system, if you have money, you're going to have certain advantages that people who lack money will not have, and that's something that people are okay with. But the system itself doesn't even work. So even if you could be okay with the class bias, the system itself is ineffective. Rather than reducing crime rates, basically crime stays the same, crime rates get reproduced. So that's kind of the subthesis within the overall thesis. So that's what I really wanted to focus on in this book report. And so, any questions about that? Does anything kind of come to mind when you kind of hear that thesis, whether it be kind of the main argument of class bias or just the overall idea that the system as is ineffective and in a sense that really doesn't reduce crime rates, it just reproduces it. Well, again, you always feel free to jump in and let me know. But when it gets into kind of investigating the thesis, let's start by kind of looking at wealthier individuals performing actions that, by definition, fit criminal actions. So, in other words, when you really break it down in terms of providing a definition of what we think a crime is, uh, crime is something that is against the law. Crime is something that impacts a lot of people, and so if you kind of use that definition, you see that a lot of activities performed by the wealthy fit the definition. And they're harmful for society as a whole. they're against the law, and those things go on, but typically they go unseen and untreated as crime. And so it's kind of interesting to kind of look at this. And this kind of gets into the beginning part of the book, where you have all of these different examples, mostly what we label a white collar crime. White collar crime not being kind of seen and not being treated as seriously compared to blue collar crimes. But if you really compare the two, the blue collar crimes may not be as impactful on society compared to a lot of white collar crimes. And the blue collar crimes tend to get all the attention. Thus, we kind of ignore the presence of the white collar crimes. And so that's what we're kind of looking at in that first part. And so, let me kind of go back a second and say, when you're looking at this, don't think about the authors critiquing the people within the system, because it's not a critique of the people, the judges, the prison workers, the police officers, probation officers. They're not trying to say that they're not doing their job. What they're actually saying is they are doing their job, the job as it's laid out for them to do. And that's the problem. When you organize something that's going to be ineffective, and when you organize something in a way that's going to be biased, then that's the way the game is going to be played. So again, we're not trying to change people. We're trying to recognize the institutional arrangements that are flawed. And if you want to create a more just system, we have to change, the rules of the game if you want to change how the game is played. So that's kind of important to, I think, take away is, we're not looking at kind of, you know, looking down on the people within the system, but basically looking at the system, how it's organized as a whole. So with that in mind, the second part of the paper, looking at three, basically asks you to look at how class operates as an influential variable when it comes to going through the system. So again, I like this book. It's a little bit different compared to the first two. Uh, it's qualitative, some parts where they kind of talk about different cases. So they talk about kind of different case studies and content analysis, we call that. And that's qualitative research, kind of like what we read before in the Fine book and the Laurel book. But they also put in a lot of quantitative data in terms of showing you the numbers and the statistics that kind of back up their arguments. So it's kind of a mix and match of how they kind of approach supporting their thesis, qualitative research, but also quantitative statistics that kind of help us kind of see what's really going on. So with that part of the paper, kind of looking at how when it comes to getting arrested, when it comes to um, getting going through a trial and getting a sentence after trial, how class really does matter. And something that should come to mind would be hiring a lawyer, for example. Um, and that could make the difference in terms of you being found innocent or guilty. That could make a difference in terms of if you have to serve time or you simply get probation. And so that's kind of the easy way to kind of think about how class would operate as a variable. But there are other factors as well. So let me turn over to you guys. How could one's class background maybe influence somebody, getting arrested in the first place? So again, just try to imagine, an individual doing some type of criminal activity. But how could maybe one's class background, forget getting a lawyer, and get to that point? We're talking about getting to your first kind of encounter with the system. So how can one's class background maybe influence you getting a warning and being sent on your way, or maybe you getting booked and then take down to the station? You guys have any thoughts or ideas of how that may work?
Maybe if you live in like a poorer neighborhood, they're just gonna assume you did it.
Yeah, and so a couple things like go on to like the neighborhood. Often the individuals are stigmatized more compared to like the middle class areas, and where the middle class kid may say, I get a warning, hey, when I was a kid, We used to mess around too, but don't do that. And next time I'll get you, but this time I'll let you off on a warning. Just kids being kids. But then in kind of the lower class areas, there's a more of a stigma that comes to the activities. Again, the activity itself is the same, but the person is kind of stigmatized, and so it's not a kid being a kid; it's a troublemaker. And rather than letting them have a second chance, you're doing it for their own good, type of thing. And so again, often this is very kind of unconscious. There's kind of a bias there that's nobody's doing it intentionally, but nevertheless it's still done. But then going back to what you mentioned in terms of kind of neighborhood, the policing's much different. So if you're policing in areas all the time, guess what? You're going to find people breaking laws. A simple example would be speeding. Of course, you're never going to catch anybody for speeding if you're never trying to clock people on a certain road or street. But if you're there on that road and on that street daily, you're going to get a lot of speeders if you want to. And so that's what you start to see here, where the lower class neighborhoods typically are policed much heavier. Their surveillance is much more intense compared to the middle upper class areas. And then yes, disproportionately crime goes on in the lower class areas more. But again, the idea would be it's kind of the chicken and the egg. So you're going to find it if you're looking for it, and likewise if you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. So again, it's just kind of interesting to kind of see all this. And again, it's not kind of the officers doing the patrolling. They're told, basically where to go, where not to go. So it's not their own choice. They're being kind of told from the top down, this is your beat. This is what, you should be doing during this time period. So as again, you have to kind of change the system rather than kind of changing the individuals in the system. So that number three, the second part of the paper, really gets into kind of class bias in the system itself. And finally, number four gets into suggestions. And I think this is an important part of the book, the last part of the book, where not only do they make their conclusion, but they kind of put forth suggestions in terms of, what could be changed, what could be modified to make the system a more just system. And that could be changing of policing strategies. It could be addressing kind of what we know causes crime versus how we respond to it. And that gets into the beginning of the book. You probably read for today. We know certain causes of crime, such as low employment, health issues, especially mental health issues, addiction, but we kind of ignore the health issues. We kind of ignore the poverty issues that correlate with crime, and we really just focus on being hard, punishing on the criminals. So there's kind of the mismatch where we kind of know what causes crime. The likelihood of crime increases with higher levels of poverty, with these health problems. But if you ignore what causes it, then you're never really going to find a solid solution in terms of how you want to treat it. So, so anyways, they get back to suggesting what they think could be changed in terms of the system, and how those changes of the system, of the institution, can lead to a more just, fair criminal justice system. So, yeah, I think that's an important part of the book. So I wanted you to write a little bit about that as well. And they provide, many examples, but I ask you to kind of come up with two examples and what the changes are and how those changes, if implemented, would actually make the system a better system. So, yeah, I mean, that's the paper. I like to think it's pretty straightforward. And like I've done before, when I'm doing my lectures, I'll try to really focus on not summarizing the book kind of chapter by chapter, but talking about the book in reference to the third report. So, if you're following along, hopefully it kind of makes sense and help you kind of approach that final paper, and helps you get started on it actually before you begin to write it and all that. So, yeah, I mean, that's the guideline section for today. So let me turn it back over to you guys. When you hear kind of these ideas being thrown out there, does anything come to mind in terms of what's going on in the world today, or television shows you may watch, or movies or anything like that?
If we have any other questions about the like while doing the report, can we like email you and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I always, put out there on the table for you. If you want me to read over, a draft of your paper before you turn it in, you know, uh, it could be a complete draft, or it could be just maybe you have the first part of the paper done. I just want to make sure that I'm on the right path. Yeah, I'm more than happy to read drafts. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So, I say, use me as a resource to help me out, because I know I try to cover my bases when it comes to the lectures and all that. But I recognize that there'll be some holes, that I didn't feel unintentionally, or I didn't feel adequately for you. So always feel free to follow up with questions if anything is a little bit fuzzy for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good uh, films, documentaries, television shows. I know when I was in graduate school, I got really into the television series of The Wire. And I think, there's a lot of overlap between what The Wire, it was an HBO series, um, shot and kind of located in Baltimore, Maryland. But that has a lot of kind of overlap here, where The Wire wasn't critiquing um, kind of the individuals in the game, whether it be kind of the criminal side or the policing side, and how there's, it's not that black and white, it's very blurry. But again, kind of how the game is set up. If the rules of the game are like this, you're going to get this. And that's what The Wire is kind of critiquing, whether it be, the criminal justice system or the educational system, the media, just the way the game is played. We get basically what we should expect to get, and if you want to, if you want different expectations, you need to change how the game is played. And that starts kind of with the organization, rather than the people actually playing it. So in class, sometimes I would show a documentary called "The House I Live In." I think you can find that on YouTube. And again, a lot of overlap between this book in terms of class and race bias when it comes to the criminal justice system. So yeah, I mean, I like using this book. I know in our class we have a lot of criminology majors, and so a little bit of kind of a taste into criminology, and before you start taking more specific classes and that. But nevertheless, even for kind of the non-crim, non kind of social major students, typically students are very receptive to this. So, any other thoughts or anything? So, what I'll do now is I'll stop the recording, and you guys are. I'll stop recording now,